Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mintis, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to make a successful video game. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruitment firm specializing in the video game industry that prioritizes quality over quantity and values transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs and provide a white glove experience that ensures a win-win outcome. I have Tim Cullings, him, here with me today. He is a Seattle video game industry veteran and champion for game development and climate science. He is currently the executive director at Global Game Jam and executive director and board president for Seattle Indies. Prior to Global Game Jam, Tim worked in DevOps at Oculus, helping ship everything between Rift and Quest 2. Let's get started. Thank you for being here today, Tim. Can you give us some background on the Global Game Jam and Seattle Indies?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Global Game Jam is a nonprofit organization based in California, and we run the world's largest annual game creation event that happens every year around the end of January. This past year, we had 40,000 people participate in 108 countries around the world. They made 7,600 games on the theme of roots. Global Game Jam itself is not a competition. It's solely meant for community and collaboration and bringing people together to help create pathways for people to find their way into the industry or into a community of game developers in their area. If that's just a hobby that they're pursuing or something they want to make into a profession, Global Game Jam provides that opportunity for people with little to no experience to come and try and learn about making games in a safe and welcoming environment. Seattle Indies is also a nonprofit. We're based in Seattle, Washington. Of course, we service the greater Puget Sound area, focusing on hosting events and creating networking spaces for independent game developers, professionals, students, anyone who's in the games industry trying to make games. So we host networking, social events, attend conferences with our people where people get the opportunity to showcase their games to the public. And we host our own expo every year called Seattle Indies Expo, which we're in the process of getting ready for, and will be coming up in a little bit less than 2 months, right alongside PAX West, which happens here in Seattle every year. We're a free event that happens on the Sunday of that weekend at Motif Hotel, where we showcase 25 of the best locally made games from the Pacific Northwest for free to the public. And you can come and play those games and meet the developers who made them.
Who will be there this year? Can you give us any teasers?
We just started judging yesterday, so we don't really know exactly. We had 56 applications this year, and we have 25 spaces for games. So every year there's a wide variety of every genre that you can imagine, and usually at least one or two tabletop or card games. So it's a really enjoyable time. People tell us every year that it's their favorite event of PAX weekend. So we're looking forward to it.
Feels so good to create and put on. What led you to join both of the organizations?
Well, I started my career in the industry in 2010 at a company called Airtight Games, which was in Redmond, Washington, and was the reason I moved to Seattle from upstate New York, where I grew up. And the company, well, in 2013, we worked on a game for the Ouya console, which was this like micro Android console that was kickstarted back in that time, and it was very like indie feeling, and we were not really like an indie studio, so I kind of was starting to connect with indies in the area to learn more about them and just be more connected to that community. Also, well as IGDA Seattle, which I was also a chapter lead of for quite a while. IGDA is International Game Developers Association. So yeah, that after, in 2014, Airtight closed. I was looking for work and was able to stay connected to the industry and felt supported by the local community here, like Seattle Indies, especially, and IGDA, and wanted to give back to those communities and help create that space for more people. So their path to the industry might be a little easier than mine was. Mine was very long and circuitous, and went through the days of when things were not, it was not as easy to find your way into the industry. So that's mainly my goal, is try to make a welcoming space for people to meet and network and have a just like built-in group of friends that they can just plug into when they move here if they're game developers. And we hear that from a lot of people who they move here because of our community to Seattle, and they like instantly just have a community that they feel welcome and a part of. And that was another thing, was the Seattle freeze is a thing here that takes a while for people to get past if you're not from here. And it took me like 4 years to find like my friend group, and so like helping create that space for people to just like show up and have a group already is like something that I was passionate about as well.
I love that. Community is so important, and finding people that are having the same problems as you, same highs and lows, it definitely makes you feel not alone. I'm curious about your long path to get into the industry. That is everybody's question. How do I get into the industry? So will you tell your story?
I mean, yeah, I just like wrote that all out in a keynote speech that I did at a conference called GDEX out in Columbus, Ohio, a couple of weeks ago. That's like an hour-long talk that I gave, but basically, I was trying to change my career in the mid 2000s, I guess, and wanted to move out to the West Coast because there was not really any type of games industry where I was living at the time in upstate New York. Tried for like a couple of years to get jobs in San Francisco because I had friends there, and I still do, and looking to be closer to them. And I just liked the city at the time, which was pretty like tech boom San Francisco. And still a lot of like artists and stuff, and it was a cool vibe there. So I was trying to move out there and get into games, but wasn't really having a lot of luck. And like found the job here in Redmond, I guess, and applied for that. And they just happened to be looking for somebody who had my exact like qualifications, but I just had no like industry experience, and like being on the outside, you don't like realize how important that is to a lot of people who are trying to hire in the industry. Definitely. And now I like get it why it took so long and was so hard, and like I'm grateful that they took a chance on me because like I had some skills that they needed, and the person who was going to be my boss at the time was a huge is a huge hockey fan, and so am I, and like, we connected on that level and like talked about that a bunch in my interview, and I think that was like helpful and what pushed me over the edge into getting that job. And once I got there, it was like took me a little bit to find my footing, but then like they were super supportive and welcoming, and just like gave me the opportunity to grow and learn a bunch about different parts of the industry. Like I broke in as an IT administrator. That was my career background, was like at the time over 15 years as an IT administrator. Yeah, that's where I started as in the industry and did a lot of work in that still for the last 10 years. and once, but like they let me branch out from that and contribute in other ways as like a QA tester and running their like websites and social media presence, which was kind of just getting started in the time. Uh, Learned about being a producer, and that's kind of how I got. Also, how I got connected to the communities was going to like PAX as like to talk to media and stuff about our games, and my my manager at the time introduced me to people at the Indie Mega booth, and that's where I discovered that those were the people that I identified with and connected with and wanted to be closer to and a part of. So
Kelly Wallach's company, right?
yeah, yep, Kelly's great.
Kelly's great. Small world.
And I just kind of got lucky that my first manager in the industry was Kim Swift, who was one of the people who created Portal. And like I didn't really know who she was at the time when I first interviewed, which was probably for the best because I would have been unreal nervous.
Yeah.
But like just getting to work with her and on her team was like super fortunate, and she really just like welcomed me no matter like what my background was professionally, and let me contribute to the team and taught me like a lot of what I know about the industry. And I've been just super grateful for her and what she enabled me to do, and being the constant like nudge in my career when I needed. Like I was, working at Oculus still in 2019 and like hung out with her at GDC, and we were talking about like all the community stuff that I do like on the side, and she was like, "You need to be getting paid for this. Like you should be doing this professionally." And so that was when I kind of like took it a little more seriously. And a year later, I was working at Global Game Jam as the director of operations. So.
Tell me about your transition from Oculus to Global Game Jam. Where was the organization when you came in, and where has it grown to today?
Yeah, I mean, I was coming in taking over for my friend Jo Summers, who was the executive producer. I worked under her as a regional organizer at Global Game Jam, and then was on the executive committee, which she was the leader of. And she received an offer from Unity, where she is now, back in like mid 2020, and recommended that I take her role as director of ops. And it just kind of like lined up because my contract at Oculus was coming to an end at that point. So I had like a week in between and stepped in to Global Game Jam in late October of 2020, which times were fairly tumultuous at that point. If
Yes.
Things we don't want to dwell on too much, but we were a little over 3 months away from launching the first ever like fully online version of Global Game Jam, because up to that point it had always been an only in-person events, and it was very like much a part of the ethos of the organization and the events to bring people together in person to meet and form community and have bonds that way. And it was like we would make exceptions for certain people to be able to jam remotely, but like typically we would require people to be in person. So and like a large percentage of our organizers who are all volunteers around the world have never run a online game jam or virtual game jam, and I had done like one or two prior to that point. So like I wouldn't say I was an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I had a little bit of experience. So we had to like quickly pivot, rewrite all of our documentation, come up with like a whole new process and strategy for how we were going to have people host their jams virtually, because there was even a question of if we would even do it that year, because we weren't sure if people wanted it, but we heard enough feedback from the community that people did still want to do it and try to do it virtually. And that was like I had to pretty much hit the ground running from late October to the end of January when we finally had the events. And I don't know like too many other people that could have pulled it off the way that we did. Like, not to toot my own horn too much, but like I just kind of had the right combination of uh, years of experience working with GTJ as a volunteer and understanding how the event works, and then understanding virtual events a little bit, and having run a ton of game jams. Yeah.
That's quite the pivot. So you started doing everything online. And from that, how did the organization evolve? Is that still primarily how you run things, or do you have in person and virtual?
Yeah, so 2022, we allowed people to start meeting in person again, and we had about 33% or so our sites be in person. Unfortunately, there was like the Omicron outbreak happened almost like exactly like 2 weeks before when the jam was going to happen. So a lot of people had to pivot last second and go back to virtual only, and that had a slight impact on our participation numbers. But this past year, we were back up to about 50% in person and saw like a huge gain up from 33,000 people last 2022 to 40,000 in 2023, and jumped up to 800 sites. But yeah, where things have evolved into where online participation is something that we're going to continue to allow and encourage going forward, mostly for accessibility reasons. So people who can't get out of their house for whatever reason, they don't live near the site. People who are like audio folks who have like a whole audio studio built in their house can't exactly move that easily. So, that lets them participate easier. We just heard from a lot of people that, it's allowed them to work with people that have moved away that they used to jam with, and like, or siblings that live on different sides of the world get to jam together. And yeah, I mean, people have opinions about it in relation to our event, but the organization and the event exist to increase accessibility for people to try to make games. So it's part of our mission to do that. And we've started doing some other virtual jams only that are like we call partner jams, where we team up with a company or organization that wants to connect with our community to have them either test out a new technology and give feedback in a game jam setting, or make games about a cause that's important to us, like mental health awareness or cultural heritage preservation. And I forget what the other one was that we worked on recently, but yeah, we've had climate science is another one that we recently did. Climate change related issues is another topic that we've done jams on. So, and those tend to be like longer, like the in-person versions of 48-hour events that usually happens over a weekend. The virtual events tend to be like 2 to 3 weeks and give people more time to work at their own pace and participate that way.
That's incredible. You're doing a lot for the industry. I'm curious about the biggest success story that's come out of Global Game Jam. I'm sure there are so many, but what are your top?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot. I mean, there's been a lot of them over the years. Like, probably the most notable game that came directly out of Global Game Jam was Surgeon Simulator, and that was a while ago. But every year there's at least at least a small percentage of the games that go on to be turned into full products. The main success that we have is people meeting each other and deciding they like working together and starting their own studios, or helping a friend get a job at their studio that they're working at. I go to basically every conference that I attend these days. I meet at least one or two people if not more, that tell me that that's Global Game Jam was how they got into the industry. It was like they went to the events and they met people there that helped them eventually get a job in the industry, and that's why how they made it to, or at least got their start in where they are today.
There's probably some marriages too. You're just connecting so many people.
Yeah, there definitely are. I can't think of any specific ones, but I definitely remember over the years hearing about that, and people who, there's babies now that were born from partnerships that formed at GGJ. I mean, this will be our 15th year, so pretty soon there'll be like a generation coming up and participating in your events from people from like the parents.
That's special. Where do you think that Global Game Jam is headed? Can you talk to us about the future direction of the organization?
Yeah, we have a lot of ideas that we're working on now. We have our director of partnerships, Charlie Harbord, who's based in the UK and Scotland, and she's been going to a lot of conferences, meeting with a lot of different people, talking about different jam ideas and programs that we're trying to get implemented. There's a lot of interest in the cultural heritage type of events that we've been putting on. The first one we did was with the State Department and their Cultural Antiquities Task Force, the United States State Department, and we did a whole jam about protecting cultural antiquities and stopping theft and trafficking. And that brought in people from over 70 countries, and we just had a lot of learned a lot of like interesting things about different cultures that I wouldn't otherwise know about. So we're talking to local governments and tourism boards to create events and jams where people will make games about the local culture and their cultural heritage, and those will be used to promote the area by the tourism board and show like also promote the games industry that's in that area that's growing. So that's one of the big initiatives that we're working on now. Growing our other event, which is this main event, which is Global Game Jam Next, which is focused on young creators from ages 12 to 17. And is like there's a full curriculum that people can engage with and teach their students how to make games in all sorts of different engines and tools. And we run that this year for the first time. We ran that alongside our main events, Global Game Jam, and that will be how we'll do things moving forward. And we're looking to grow that event and make educators more aware that it's an option and something they can get involved with, and give their students an opportunity to learn to make games and potentially find careers in that industry at some point, or send them on like a STEM path to engineering or something like that. Those are kind of the main two growth areas that we're working on. We're also talking with multiple other partners about some really exciting jam opportunities that will be coming up next year. And then just trying to keep growing the main event back to the pre-pandemic numbers that we had, which in 2020, like end of January, like right before things shut down, we had almost 50,000 people participate. So trying to grow things back to that level and beyond is something that we're also working on, and just looking at ways we can give people chances to have more opportunity to show their works to public and get feedback on it from industry professionals. There's a lot we're trying to do. There's only 3.5 of us that work here at the organization. The rest is all volunteers. So yeah.
You are busy. And tell me about the mentorship program. How can people get involved who might want to mentor in Global Game Jam?
That's still kind of a work in progress. Like I have some ideas on how that's going to work, but we haven't really rolled that out yet. We're in the process of getting our new website ready to launch, and hopefully some of that's going to include an option for people to be like game reviewers or game mentors and not have to dedicate like a full weekend of their time if they don't have it. But something we get a lot of feedback on our jammer survey every year is they want like a way to get feedback on their games, and with like 7,600 games, it's impossible for the four of us to go through all those in
Yes.
any kind of meaningful way. So I'm hoping to kind of distribute that work and give people the opportunity that want that kind of feedback on their games to have that. So currently at Seattle Indies, we have a mentorship program that's been going for a little over a year now. And every 6 months, we open up the registrations again. I'll post up like a Google form in our Discord, and people can sign up to be mentors and mentees. And then we go through a matchmaking process where we try to prioritize people from like marginalized communities or ethnic backgrounds and match them up with mentors first. That's been going really great. We have like over 150 people, I think, maybe matches right now. I can't remember the exact number, but it's over 100 matches, and they meet like at least once a quarter, I believe. And the feedback has been great so far. People have already like moved on in their careers and got the courage to get jobs or go back to school or just continue on and stay motivated. So yeah, that's been going on.
Great. Everybody needs a mentor. I'm sure you have people you can call to that you mentioned and say, hey, I have this problem. Will you talk me through it? But that's truly invaluable. So that's exciting. And is that just for Seattle specifically? Do you need to be in Seattle to be in that program?
No, I mean, people outside of Seattle are welcome to apply. We tend to prioritize local people, but yeah, we have some folks who are in the program that are not from Seattle, and they just meet on Zoom or remotely however they want, and yeah, that's fine.
Is Seattle Indies part of a larger organization, or it's just Seattle or Puget Sound?
Yeah, we're just local. There are a lot of other similar groups around the country and the world that we're friends with and partner with. There's like Pig Squad in Portland, and there's groups up in Vancouver and a group in San Francisco. And we have friends in Pittsburgh that we do a GDC event with every year that we do a roundtable for people who organize communities like Seattle Indies, or BitBridge is the one in Pittsburgh. And we bring all those folks together to talk about what their like concerns are, or just get advice from those of us who've been doing it for a long time. We always get some really veteran people coming to that event to not only ask questions, but to help answer questions that we don't like have to ask. Like they just show up every year and provide insight. It's always a great time. And we have a not very active Discord, but that's like a way that we kind of connect those folks and keep them in touch. And as I travel to different conventions and communities, I try to connect with those folks who are doing the same types of things in those areas and talk to them about what their communities are like and give them advice based on my experience. So that's been good.
I'm glad you have that group. I have that group too. I have a recruiting group, and we talk, and people that are on the same page as you are incredibly helpful, but in a parallel.
Yeah. And then separately, I have like executive directors and games support group that we started in the last year or so of folks who are in the nonprofit space and games, which is a very small and select group, giving each other support and advice and feedback on things and figuring out ways we can work together. So
tell me more about that. You meet monthly. I love that it's called a support group. I'm in a CEO support group too, and we go over our biggest issues and things that we're stuck on and all brainstorm together. And I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today without that.
Yeah, we try to meet monthly. It's kind of informal. It's just a few notable folks from the industry that I've known for a long time and that have been doing it longer than I who have a lot of great insights and are just like keep my head up and positive. And it's just good to like feel like I'm not doing this by myself, I guess, and that other people are going through similar experiences.
Absolutely. In my group for a while, we had to say, what was the most messed up thought that crossed your mind that month? And you'd read it and everyone would say, I've definitely had that thought too. Yeah, same page. And then you think, hey, I'm not alone and everyone's dealing with the same issues. So
Yeah.
highly recommend that question. Very entertaining answers. Tell me, so you said that Seattle Indies really helped you land Oculus, right?
To a certain extent. I mean, it was more like just making me feel like I was still connected because it took me like a year basically to go from Airtight to Oculus. So it was like, and there was a lot of places I applied to in between, and just it was good to have feel connected to people that are in the industry in some way, and just have those like people to talk to get advice from as I was like going through different interviews and just not getting too like down about the whole thing. This, but in the end, I ended up mostly getting in there because the person the guy who was the audio director at the last company I was at, Airtight, ended up being the audio director at Oculus. So he gave me a recommendation there when they really needed somebody who had the skill set that I had to be able to support the growing content team at our Seattle office. And so, yeah, that was mostly how I was able to land it.
I don't remember the stat, but I feel like most people find jobs from knowing somebody or knowing somebody that knows somebody, opposed to just applying online, especially these days where there are so many applicants every day. So I love that.
Yeah.
And how big was the studio? It's pretty early Oculus days, right?
Yeah, when I started, there was probably less than 100 people between the three offices we had at the time, which like the content team was in the old Facebook office downtown on Minor Ave. And then we had the hardware team that was spinning up, that was formerly Carbon Games that Oculus acquired, or Facebook acquired at the same time that Oculus was acquired. And they were like our industrial design and hardware design team that was in the U district. And then we had our research department that was spinning up in Redmond, which is now Reality Labs, that only had 20 or so people when I started there. And we go like 8 around the same lunch table. And so like that grew. There's a couple thousand people that like at the height of it were working there. So
What was it like to experience that growth and just see the company evolve throughout your years there?
it was pretty intense. Like they hired me to do IT support again there because they had no like local people. Other people were based at the headquarters down in California, and the Facebook IT folks were all Mac based. Like everybody that worked at Facebook and worked on Facebook all worked on Macs, and the games people were all working on PCs. So I had the experience that I brought with me from Airtight of supporting game teams working in a PC environment. And so, yeah, we were like, I was mainly for the first 2+ years just constantly setting up new computers for people that were getting hired, just because there was like explosive growth and just like building desks and putting monitors on desks and like making sure everybody had all the software that they needed to be able to do their jobs, and building out the whole like help desk support infrastructure that we had here locally to be able to support everyone and have all the gear on hand that people might need to fix any problems they had, and then help build tools for the developers. Like after a couple of years, I pivoted more into like a systems admin and engineering role, where I was building more of the back end tools instead of like doing direct user support. And we just constantly were growing and building more and more to support more and more people. For a while, it was just myself and two other people who were like the entire infrastructure team for all of Oculus, and we were just like pretty slammed for a couple of years in that role until they started growing that team more and realizing they needed more help and more support. I think when I left, there was at least 10 people on the team, but I had mainly been doing it myself for a while. So yeah, it was mainly just the amount of people. Like I think there was 300 people across all of Oculus when I started, and in the thousands by the time I left. So it was like the culture certainly changed. Like in the early days, you could know pretty much everybody and have a lot of say in things, and
Yeah.
it was a very like tight knit group. But we also like had to burn ourselves out pretty bad to like do what we were able to do with shipping products, and so definitely having more people and more support was necessary to get the company to where it is today.
That is a wild ride. And so was Oculus already acquired by Facebook/Meta when you joined?
Yeah, I joined about 6 months after the acquisition, but it was still a pretty like hectic transition time of
Yeah.
like trying to convince the internal Facebook people of why we needed certain things and what our developers needed to build like a game platform and a piece of hardware that was totally different from what people who are building a web, interface and website basically and a mobile app, like completely opposite directions. And just
Yeah. What do you think your biggest learning experience was from your Oculus time?
oh, there was a ton. I mean, it was just like how to be in the beginning. It was just being scrappy and getting things done with whatever way we could, because we were moving super fast to try to get our product out the door first and be like the first to market with consumer VR. And a lot of times we just like were moving faster than what the Facebook infrastructure could support. So we had to just figure out how to get the job done in the best way possible. And that's still what I do a lot with indies, because we tend to not have Facebook style budgets. So
Yeah,
uh,
you do. Even Facebook doesn't have that anymore. So yeah, times are
yeah,
different.
that was definitely a different experience where you'd ask for one thing and they'd be like, well, why don't 10 of them? Like, if you're going to order one, just something. I don't need 10, but okay. It's
Yeah.
very different.
Yeah. But at least you had the small kind of company mentality previously. I feel like it's always a shock to go from small to large and just the operation scale, the perks and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you feel
I
like,
learned a lot about like hardware production, which I never really had been involved with before. And there's a whole different world that goes along with that. And that was super interesting. So
yeah, where do you feel like the industry is headed? What are your insights or analysis from seeing so many games made all the time and your background in the industry?
you mean just like the games industry as a whole?
The games industry as a whole, trends, what you think about new hardware coming out, especially since you worked at Oculus?
Yeah, I mean, on the VR side, it's still hard to say. Like Quest 2 certainly got a decent amount of adoption and consumer interest. And so it seems like people are starting to get it and engage with VR in that level more. The Apple product announcement was interesting, and we'll see like how people respond to that given the price points and the content that they've announced for it. Is in my mind, it's more about, is the Apple brand able to move a product like that than about like, do people want that? But we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
um in terms of the games industry, like you just see it more getting more open and diverse. Like it's still not the most diverse industry, but like at the top levels at least, especially, but like on the working level and the ground levels, things are getting better and getting more diverse, and there's more opportunities for more people to be involved and be developers and have a say and lend their voice to the stories that are being created and the experiences, which hopefully will make things more interesting and give people more options when they're with games that they want to play. Um, we're kind of in like a contraction phase a bit in the industry right now. There was like the huge boom during COVID where people were just like hiring like crazy and stuff, and a few different factors have contributed to like why things are going the way they are with the whole crypto craze kind of didn't pan out the way people thought it might. So
Yes.
even though I still see a lot of companies getting funding to make Web3 games, so it's kind of hard to have a real good sense of how things are going to turn out there. And then AI is kind of the new buzzword that people are gravitating towards, and people have a lot of feelings about that one way or the other. I mean,
Yes. Both Web3 and AI, very polarizing topics.
incredibly, yeah. I see AI being useful in certain aspects and helpful in optimizing workflows. And I mean, it's already implemented in a lot of places, and it's just becoming more mainstream now and more accessible to anyone to really get their hands on it, for better or worse. And I just hope people like use it in a way that's sensible and it adds to what the industry is trying to do, rather than just kind of gravitate towards it because the money's going that direction. And it seems like it's the hot thing and everybody wants it. Yeah, not really.
It is. It's
But
definitely a buzzword. And in recruiting, people always tell you, oh, I want to work on whatever the buzzword is generally. So, but I haven't heard a lot of people really desire to work for a company that's using a ton of AI.
yeah, I mean, Unity's making a pretty hard push for it, so we'll see what happens in that regard. Um, Cloud gaming is kind of like the big space that people are trying to make, or at least the big players are trying to like make their mark in. Um, that's kind of where I see things getting more robust and available in the next few years.
Yeah. Big studios are spending so much on games too. The budgets are wild. But then there are also these indie games that are runaway hits and doing so well. So, and they're not polished or, anywhere near the level,
Mm-hmm.
but just as popular sometimes. So,
Yeah, there's a lot more opportunity for people to get their games out in front of people, and you don't just have to go to every games expo in the world. And you can get things on streaming platforms and find somebody who is into your game there and help boost it that way. And it's still like a battle for indies to find their players and find their audience and have that breakthrough hit. But it's more attainable than it ever has been. So.
what do you think the recipe for an indie breakthrough hit is? Question of the day.
Yeah. I don't necessarily know that there is one. A lot of it is like, uh, yeah, just sometimes you get lucky and hit the right like trend of you just find a niche that people are like looking for a game that fits it, or like people spend years of their lives like working on these indie games if it's like just them or a really small team or it's their like hobby project on the side while they're doing a full-time job. And it's hard to say like you start a game and then release it 6 to 8 years later, and who knows what the industry looks like. Like the entire industry changed 2 or 3 times over in the amount of time. So like a lot of times it can just be stroke of luck. A lot of it is like um, building your own personal brand as a developer and getting out there and meeting other developers and making a name for yourself and finding your artistic voice through your games and building an audience that likes that. And you can be lucky and get a hit right out of the gate, but other people just kind of work their way into it and just are consistent about the games that they produce and uh, serve their audience that are looking for those types of games. But I would say it's hard to like, as an indie, it's hard to chase trends. Like you can't, you'll just like always be behind if you're trying to go that direction. So
Yeah. Maybe that's a metaphor for life, though, right? You should do what you want to do and what makes you happy in the game that you want or the life that you want and not worry about really what's trending. I feel like the authenticity is key and passion.
absolutely.
Yeah. People see through the trends or they don't.
Mm-hmm.
I have one final question for you. Who has been your biggest mentor throughout your career and what was the best advice that they gave you?
I've had a lot of different people that I've looked to for advice. That's a good question. I don't know if I have like one specific person. Like early in my career, it was definitely Kim, who was my manager and team lead at the time. Just her encouragement to not be hung up on what my official role was on the team or my title or whatever, and just be free to contribute as somebody who has a lot of experience in the games and or playing games and uh, understanding what players want was helpful just to like make me feel welcome and open in that regard. Yeah, there's a lot of people who've given me a lot of good advice along the way. I don't know that I've always listened, but it's always helpful to have people that you can lean on and have that support network, because it's a definitely like not an easy industry to be in. Like things are always changing, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's great, and other times it's not so great. Getting into like social media trouble can be a thing that can happen. Like that happened to us a couple of years ago at Global Game Jam with a certain sponsor that we had that was Web3 based, and people were pretty upset about that. And just having Kate Edwards, who was my bot manager at the time and the executive director, had been through like issues like that, and she just had a very like calm demeanor about it, and just like, yeah, this is a thing that might happen sometime, and you just have to kind of ride it out and was more like measured about how we should respond to things. And so, yeah, those types of things were helpful in my career.
What's the answer there? If people are really upset, just accept them being upset, validate their feelings. I feel like everything goes back to having a kid. Like, I see you're upset because,
essentially,
right? I mean, it's kind of the same, but is that sort of the take on it? Acknowledge it and
yeah, it was more just like validate it and like treat it as an opportunity to have a conversation
Yeah,
rather than just like trying to be right. It was like
definitely.
things kind of boiled up on Twitter, and it was not really a place to have a discussion. So like we invited people to our Discord and just had a better, longer discussion, more like in depth there, rather than just shouting at each other on social media.
Yes.
That was helpful and brought things to a better conclusion, I think.
Good. I think being open to feedback is huge and saying that you're willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, just things that stick with me are just like staying humble and being open to feedback. And you never like always just listen to people. Like you never know who the person you're talking to today is going to turn out to be in the next 3 to 5 years in the industry or in your life or in your career, and how they might have an impact. So like always be respectful to people that you interact with in the industry, and that'll help you get further, I think at least.
Everyone will always circle back with you. You'll find them again somehow, some way at different companies later in time.
For sure.
And it sounds like Kim kind of taught you to be T-shaped because she's from Valve, right?
Right.
So I love it. And if people want to hear more about Seattle Indies or the Global Game Jam, how should they get in touch with you or get in touch with the organization?
You can find our websites. Globalgamejam.org has all of the information about how to connect with us, and seattleindies.org similarly has all of our info. So
Thanks so much, Jim.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.